I am Coach Tina Lane, and it is an honor to be back in the studio after all these years because of the pandemic. I want to thank the awesome Michael Matthews for having me to host the show again. Today we have a topic that is dear to my heart: important papers. The papers you should have in place for your loved ones and for yourself. And we have an extraordinary guest in the studio today, Mrs. Lauren Nance. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Tina. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I want to share a little brief information from your bio about who you are. Okay. Lauren Nance is an entrepreneur for more than 30 years. Wow. Running her own event planning business called Nance Communication. It consists of copywriting and project management. She is also a certified meeting plan professional by the Events Industry Council. Wow, that's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
She holds leadership positions in many nonprofit, professional, and service organizations, including serving as a state board member of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. Important Papers was launched as a passion project of Lauren in 2020 during the global pandemic. We're going to talk a little bit about that more.
Great.
Lauren earned her Bachelor's of Arts, Journalism, and Mass Media from Rutgers University. Lauren is from Passaic and a longtime resident of Patterson, where she is active in her local community. Welcome again, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So why did you launch Important Papers? And tell us what it is.
Sure. For the longest time, I just felt that brown people, especially people of color especially, needed to be more aware about end of life matters. We get so, I guess, we enjoy life, right?
Yes.
We go through our days and sometimes we think we're invincible. But some of the most challenging times of my life is when I had to say goodbye to a loved one.
Yes.
When my father passed away, when my aunt passed away, when my uncle passed away, when my infant sons passed away. It raised my awareness for the importance of having all the important papers that grandma and them probably hid under the mattress sometimes, yes, or locked in a box somewhere. And I know we'll talk a lot about what those important papers are, but it's so important that we not only enjoy our life, but also prepare for a time where we won't be here anymore. And our family members then have to take up the charge of handling our business. So it became a passion project for me. I'm a business communication strategist by trade and all the other wonderful accolades, yes, that you shared. But I felt that I needed to take a pause from what I do in my business and just give something to the people, give something to the village,
yes,
that would help us as people of color to do better in that area.
Awesome. Were people receptive to Important Papers when you launched it, and how many viewers came on, and how did you launch it, on what media site?
That's a very great thing to mention. So we know that when the pandemic came, yes, everything went virtual. So I used my meeting planning expertise to use Zoom. Everybody's been Zooming, right?
Yes.
To use Zoom in order to, Zoom and social media really,
okay, to
let people know that I wanted to do this 6-week series and bring on experts. And one of the disclaimers that I think we should make right at the, yes, top is that I am not an attorney. I'm not a financial planner, neither are you. Yes. We're not experts, but we are just raising awareness to the importance, yes, of making certain that we have certain things in order for our end of life matters. So we're sharing general information so that you can take it back to your attorney, take it back to your financial planner and say, hey, I saw this show, right, The Village Drum, and they were talking about making sure my affairs are in order. What does that all mean? And then a certified professional can help you along the way with that. So, again, it was a video series, and I was surprised that over 150 people have been touched or had been touched. This was back in 2020, yes, so I'm not even sure what the numbers are now.
Right.
In 2020, over 150 people were touched by Important Papers, the series, and every week we had over 50 people that were engaging and learning from the experts that came onto the show.
And I was one of the individuals who actually decided to go on the Zoom, and I learned so much information. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about the type of guests you had on the show?
Certainly.
And what did they discuss? Again, our disclaimers, we're not attorneys or lawyers, but we just want to talk about what was discussed on the show and how it can be beneficial to the viewers.
There were 6 different areas that I felt were important for the people to hear about. And we may not cover all 6 of them,
right.
But the first one I'll mention is that we had an attorney come on. Because again, that attorney is that professional, and he's specifically an estate planning attorney. And he came on to talk with us about the specific documents that are important for an individual or a family to consider when they are getting their important papers together. We also had a certified financial planner that talked about the financial aspect of what's necessary. And you don't have to have a lot of money in order to make certain that your affairs are in order financially. We had someone come on and talk about advocacy and advocating for your loved one when they're ill and they can't speak for themselves. We had another guest that talked about insurance matters. GoFundMe is not an insurance policy for a funeral, okay?
No, it isn't.
So we went into detail with an insurance expert about that. And then there was another week where we talked about how to even have the conversation. It's so hard to have the conversation about why important papers and that whole estate planning topic is important to have the discussions about. So that was a very, very engaging week, an engaging conversation. So those are some of the topics that we talked about.
Yes, and one of the things you stated was advocating for your loved one, and why it is important to have that conversation. From my personal experience, sometimes that conversation is not as important because you're scared to have it. You don't want to talk about planning for a loved one to leave. But you have to, because you need to have the estate planning in place. And you never think that you'll be in a situation when you have to advocate for your loved one.
Indeed.
But as we get older, we have children, we have parents, things transition. And you find yourself in a role where you are that caregiver, that person advocating for that loved one in their life. And you realize, I need to have important papers in place. So that brings me into this question that you have right here. What are the key legal documents we should have in place for the end of life matters?
That's a great question, and it really is, the answer is very individualized.
Okay.
It really depends. But I have found from my experience having a family, I have a husband and I have a daughter who's 20 now. And so for us, we found that the 3 key documents we wanted to start with were a will.
Okay.
We wanted to make certain that there was power of attorney in place, even for our college-age daughter.
Okay.
Because if now that she's an adult, if something happens and she's not able to speak for herself or act on her own because there's a medical challenge or some issue, that power of attorney gives us as her parents, even though people would think it's an automatic thing, legally that document is what allows us to have conversations on her behalf.
Okay.
And then the third document that we focused on was an advance directive or living will. That's the one where if you are, again, medically challenged and you can't speak for yourself, to the doctors to let them know what kind of treatment you want or don't want, there is someone that you trust that is left with that authority. So those are the 3 documents we started with: a will, a power of attorney, and an advance directive. And there are a lot of details that go into each, but it really depends on your specific situation. Then there are also more advanced or complex documents when you have property and when you have children and you have to think about guardianship and all of those matters. There are other documents that come into play. But for us, we found that having those 3 were the first ones that we started out with, and an attorney was able to give us that guidance. And some documents you can find, you can go to the office supply store in your state, and you can find a document in an office supply store, and those are fine. You just want to follow the instructions, but you'll get the most customized and specialized information by conferring with a professional.
Okay. That's good to know, because many times we don't know where to go and where to start.
Yes.
And that's why it was very important that you had that Zoom that day, or Zoom for 6 weeks actually, to tell us where do we go, how do we start the process, how do we understand what a will is or a power of attorney. Why are these important papers even important?
Exactly.
So I was glad that you shared it. And sometimes I know from what you had said, it's our personal experiences that lead us to want to do this even more. We find ourselves in a situation, we're in the hospital with a loved one, and people are asking questions, and now you have to make decisions. Or you're in a situation where you're planning for a funeral, and do you have things in place? So one of my next questions is, why is it important to have life insurance? Again, we're not licensed, but we just want to talk about life insurance and why it is important to have it.
We can probably count on one hand, both hands, and probably all of our toes really, how many times in our lifetime we've encountered family members or friends who had a loved one pass away and they had no life insurance.
Yes.
How the family had to come together just to put their dollars and cents and change into a pot in order to make certain that they put away their loved one properly. Funerals cost money.
Yes.
And the funeral home isn't in the business of giving discounts. It's a funeral home and it's a business.
Yes, it is.
So with that being said, life insurance helps make certain that you not only have your funeral expenses taken care of, but also any other financial commitments you had in your lifetime. Your life insurance makes sure that your family members aren't left holding the burden of figuring all of that stuff out once you're gone. I have heard with my own ears, Tina, our elders say, oh, when I'm gone, that's just for such and such son or such and such daughter to handle. No. And that's so unfair when you're dealing with the emotional strife of your loved one dying and not being here anymore. Yes. If we just set aside a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money to make certain that our life insurance was in order, to make certain that our wills were in order and all of those important papers were in order, what a more joyous life our children, our family members could lead, but also it doesn't stop up the legacy of them moving forward and having success. When they have to pause their lives in order to handle your stuff and you're off the scene, that means that if they were a successful lawyer or a doctor or someone who had a business of their own, they have to put their whole life on pause to figure your stuff out. Yes. And that's so unfair when we could just handle it ourselves while we're here. Life insurance doesn't cost as much as we might think it does. We spend that few extra dollars. Once we're off the scene, our family doesn't have to worry about the trials and tribulations that come about if there wasn't any life insurance. And again, GoFundMe is not a life insurance policy. Right. It's not an automatic that people are going to come and have money to contribute when you had an opportunity to plan properly.
That's right. And that's the key. Having the opportunity to plan properly, and everything we said about life insurance is about preparation.
Yes,
we want to prepare before something happens.
Yes.
Putting things in place so we do not have to rely on a GoFundMe. We have things in place already for our loved one. When should one start documenting, getting their important papers in place, and who should they delegate it to?
That is an excellent question. You ask good questions. I shared with someone who was 26 years old at the time of the Important Papers series. She asked me that very question. She had graduated college. She was young in her career. She said, Aunt Lauren, my niece, Aunt Lauren, I think it's too early for me to start thinking about getting my affairs in order. And I said, no, sweetheart. Look at it this way. You may not think that you have a lot, but I'm sure you have some cherished items of yours that if you were no longer here, you might want a certain relative or friend to have. The money that you do have in the bank account, the car that you have, the way that you would even want your funeral to go. You want to be able to have a say in that so that it's not figured out after you're gone. And so it's important to designate a trusted family member, a trusted friend even, because sometimes it's not a family member who might be the executor of your will, or the executor is that person that makes certain that your wishes are adhered to.
Yes.
Right? And that's a whole legal process. And we can talk about what you do with a will once your loved one has passed, because some people think one thing, but it's really something else. Okay. So it's never too early